Suppose the 19th century had racist black anthropologists and now find all the similarities between white people and chimpanzees.
During the 19th century, a number of anthropologists and other scientists adopted pseudoscientific methods and theories to try and prove racial hierarchies that were put in place to support an economic system that was dependent on cheap forced labor and colonialism. So it has been very interesting to note that recent genetic research is showing the exact opposite of these early modern era assertions. This genetic research shows how modern humans became smart. It also shows that the historical geographic dispersal of key human traits is counterintuitive. And we will cover these findings and show why what most people think of race today is a complete fabrication. We will also see why the actual determinants of human evolution are not widely shared. Amongst the most famous scientists to popularize such theories is Samuel George Morton, who collected and measured human skulls to try and demonstrate that cranial capacity, and thus brain size, varied among races, with black people supposedly having smaller brains than white people. His work evolved into an attempt to classify different races based on their cranial features. Although well disproven, as we shall see, these theories have caught on like wildfire and are being used till this day to try and say that those with more melanin are of lesser intellectual strength. But he wasn't alone, nor was it the only theory trying to find anything against black people, anything that would justify their mistreatment, which often manifested in economic disinvestment of black communities in the Americas and colonialism in Africa. Others, like influential French aristocrat Comte de Gobineau, who not only coined the term Aryan master race, but also popularized the degeneration theory that posited that different races represent different stages of human development, with Europeans at the pinnacle. Well, the recent discovery of Homo naledi in South Africa has upended all of these theories. In 2013, two recreational cavers, Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker, were exploring the Rising Star cave system when they stumbled upon a narrow vertical chute that led to a chamber now known as the naledi chamber. Inside, they found numerous bones scattered on the surface. Lee Berger, a paleoanthropologist from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, who had previously made significant hominid discoveries, led the expedition. Recognizing the difficulty of accessing the chamber, which had an extremely narrow entrance, Berger put out a call for small, skilled cavers with archaeological or paleontological experience. This led to the formation of an all-female team of underground astronauts who were capable of navigating the tight spaces to excavate the remains. The team began excavating in November 2013, and it quickly became apparent that they had found a new species of hominin. The site yielded over 1,500 specimens belonging to at least 15 individuals, ranging from infants to elderly adults, making it one of the largest collections of a single species of hominids ever discovered. They named this new species Homo naledi. And why is Homo naledi so special? Well, because naledi showed advanced levels of intelligence, but with a very small brain. Homo naledi was burying its dead. This trait is very important and deterministic of higher intelligence and consciousness. One buries its dead if it understands the value of the self, and thus the self-reflection beyond death. It also implies complex tool use, which is yet another indicator of higher intelligence. Even more surprising was Naledi's ability to navigate the sophisticated cave system where the remains were found. This type of navigation could indicate a higher level of cognitive function than what was expected from their small brain size. All these led researchers to study the genome of Homo naledi for clues on human intelligence, and what they found shocked them. "400,000 years ago, Neanderthal diverged from the modern human family branch. Neanderthal, as we all know, is an extinct member of the genus Homo who is easily identifiable by his stocky appearance, short limbs, especially his legs, and his very hairy body. Although Neanderthal had a larger brain capacity than modern humans, this size did not confer onto him the intellectual advantages that are observed in modern humans and in hominids that displayed high-level reasoning and understanding. Multiple papers such as Neanderthal Man and the Ancestors of Homo sapiens by François Bourdet have shown that the lack of variety and advancement in Neanderthal tool technologies indicated a lack of abstract thinking and planning depth. The divergence of Neanderthal away from the modern human is particularly marked by changes in the TKTL1 gene, and this is clearly illustrated in this recent study by researchers from the Max Planck Institute in their discovery of the mutation of the TKTL1 gene in humans and its implications for high-level brain functions. And I quote, "Neanderthal brains were similar in size to those of modern humans but differed in shape. What we cannot tell from fossils is how Neanderthal brains might have differed in function or organization of brain layers, such as the neocortex." Pinson et al. Have now analyzed the effect of a single amino acid change in the transcatolase-like 1, TKTL1, protein on production of basal radial glia, the workhorses that generate much of the neocortex. Modern humans differ from apes and Neanderthals by this single amino acid change. When placed in organoids or overexpressed in non-human brains, the human variant of TKTL1 drove more generation of neuroprogenitors than did the archaic variant. The authors suggest that the modern human has more neocortex to work with than the ancient Neanderthal did. End quote. The implications of a higher neuron production are also expressed in an exponential increase in the number of synapses. Synapses are the connections between neurons and can be thought of as expressing larger capacity for complex reasoning as their number rises. In fact, in the prefrontal cortex, the degree of connectivity of every neuron varies between 1,000 to 30,000. This means that each neuron can have up to 30,000 connections with other neurons. So when the TKTL1 gene mutation happened and quadrupled neuron production in the frontal cortex, it resulted in a non-linear leap in cognitive capacity overnight. In addition, as the number of neurons increased within a similar capacity cranium, it means that the neurons formed even more connections between each other, leading to even more synapse connections. What does this mean? This means that neuron production in the frontal cortex, and not size of the brain, was the determinant factor in the intellectual leap that humans experienced as they branched away from other hominids. And the oh-so-celebrated Neanderthal did not have this gene mutation. But do you know who did? Homo naledi. Homo naledi, who with his smaller brain capacity exhibited, as we have seen, all the hallmarks of an advanced being. And it isn't just the TKTL1 gene that gave us indications that brain size wasn't the predominant factor in intelligence. After Einstein's death in 1955, the pathologist Thomas Stoltz Harvey, who conducted the autopsy at Princeton Hospital, removed Einstein's brain without the permission of his family. Harvey believed that the brain could provide insights into the neurological basis for Einstein's genius. Harvey then preserved the brain in formaldehyde and later sectioned it into numerous pieces. Some of these pieces were mounted on slides, while others were kept in jars. He distributed pieces of the brain to various pathologists and researchers over the years, hoping that future scientific techniques might unlock the secrets of Einstein's intelligence. It was during these various studies that researchers noted the brain's size. Measurements showed that Einstein's brain weighed 1230 grams, which is well below than the average adult male brain weight of about 1400 grams. However, certain regions of Einstein's brain, such as those involved in mathematical and spatial reasoning, were found to be unusually well developed. So, one of the most recognized and esteemed scientific minds, heralded by all for his cognitive abilities, had a small brain. Smaller, in fact, than that of the average female. The proponents of the bigger brain narrative would have classified Einstein as a mental retard if they had found his male fossil without knowing his mental abilities. Same thing would apply for Imhotep, the boy genius who in one lifetime invented the science of medicine, the architecture and building techniques of the Great Pyramids, and many other contributions to engineering and chemistry. If the cranium of this African man was found, we would not attribute it the genius it deserves. And yet, here are the depictions of Imhotep by his own people in his own time. And we have known for a long time that cranium size does not equate to intelligence, but just like the lies made of ancient history, once that narrative is out in the wild and benefits a certain segment of the population, it becomes virtually impossible to correct. And there have been several research papers that have clearly debunked that myth. Amongst those are the research paper called The Relationship of Brain Size and Brain Metabolic Capacity to Cognitive Performance in Healthy Young Adults by Richard J. Heyer et al. This research investigates the metabolic rate of the brain regions as a more relevant factor than mere brain size in predicting cognitive performance. Meaning that instead of looking at size as a predominant factor for intelligence, it might be more important to look at metabolic rate. This makes sense because a brain that solves more complex problems quicker would require more energy. And in fact, a brain with more neurons and synapses would consume far more energy than a brain which doesn't. Another such paper is the famous paper, General Intelligence Does Not Help Us Understand the Functional Neuroanatomy of Intelligence, by Richard J. Heyer. Heyer argues that understanding the specific neural architectures is more important than overall brain size in explaining intelligence. So then, if we were to list out factors that influence intelligence and compare their impact, brain size would be far weakly correlated to measurable intelligence compared to far more determining factors like architecture of the brain and metabolic rate. In addition, brain size has to be controlled for the population you are testing against, because different populations achieve similar levels of measurable intelligence, but with very different brain capacities. It is also interesting to note that when researchers looked into the metabolic rate of Neanderthals, they drew very interesting conclusions. That one, Neanderthal had a much lower cerebral metabolic rate compared to humans, and two, their mitochondrial network was vastly different from humans, pointing to a divergence in the two groups at least 500,000 years ago. So it is a fallacy to think that Neanderthal was a close relative to humans. It did not look like a human. It could not hunt like a human. It could not think like a human. You can understand the romantic need by the followers of the racial hierarchy ideology to uphold Neanderthal on an evolutionary pedestal. Alas, the research is showing that it was a monster that was lucky on some occasions to be sexually compatible with Homo sapiens. So it is not for lack of trying to find a determinant in human intelligence and use it to differentiate or justify perceived intellectual differences between black and whites. There have now been innumerous studies that have tried. All have come to the same conclusion that all humans possess the element that makes us smart, and no studies so far have found that one group possesses it more than another. But I can already hear many of you. But what about IQ tests? Well, let's talk about that. In early 20th century France, with Alfred Binet and his colleague Theodore Simon, initiated a series of tests that would become the IQ test. In 1904, the French government appointed a commission, which included Binet, to develop a method to differentiate between normally intelligent children and those who needed special education. Binet and Simon set out to create a tool that would help in identifying children in public schools who might require special education services. This test was then quickly picked up by Louis Terman, a psychologist at Stanford University. He adapted the scale and published a revised version of it in 1916 as the Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale. And from there, the test has become widely used as a standardized measure of intelligence. Well then, if IQ tests are to be used as the de facto way we will be measuring how smart one person is, we ought to make sure that it is measuring the right thing. In other words, there should be no major component of intelligence that IQ would leave, lest it is measuring the wrong thing completely. And it is not just a few elements that the IQ test is not able to measure, it is literally whole dimensions, or important vectors of human intelligence that IQ is not able to capture. One such dimension of human intelligence is innovation. This is completely unmeasurable by the IQ test, and yet it represents one of the most important aspects of being human. What would be the IQ score you would assign to the person who invented lipstick? Yet another dimension of intelligence that IQ tests completely miss is out-of-the-box thinking. Here again, in the realm of solving problems, one's ability to think outside of the current context to find solutions uncommon to most is priceless. Learning speed, or someone's ability to acquire new skills of all sorts. Imagine that in order to survive in a competitive natural environment, you need to very quickly be able to mimic the skills of animals and other humans around you. How can this be measured on a paper or computerized test? In fact, TikTok dance imitations, although still inaccurate, would be a better measure of that skill than an IQ test. Abstract reasoning, again completely unmeasurable by IQ tests, and yet essential for higher-order intelligence. Same goes for strategic thinking. Same for critical thinking. Emotional intelligence. How do you measure one's ability to influence others in day-to-day interactions? Creativity, especially artistic creativity. Why isn't there an IQ test for that? And yet, a non-negligible percentage of human economy is purely driven by creativity. I could go on and on about various aspects of human intelligence and problem-solving that we all agree are of critical importance, but that are completely missed by IQ scores. But maybe I will add one last element: vision. The ability to imagine a future state, for oneself or for a group, and to also visualize a way to get there. These vectors of intelligence that are not measured by IQ all require inordinate amounts of computation and abstraction. Their level of complexity is staggering and shows the difficulty that experts have experienced trying to measure intelligence. You would think that in order to measure something, one would need a clear definition of what that thing is. Well, intelligence, till this day, has not been well defined, most probably because it is a very, very high-dimensional trait. I have multiple definitions of intelligence, but the one I keep going back to is survivability, ability to adapt. These large number of traits that cannot be measured by IQ tests are why you can have within a high school a top-end student who is completely unable to rank up in the social scale and often unable to interact meaningfully with their peers. And yet, in the workforce and in human interactions at large, the latter set of skills is equally as important. This is also why within an army you can have engineers who are not adept at making life-or-death tactical decisions that come naturally to a platoon commander. And yet, when we see them operate in their respective environment, we cannot but say that they are smart. But only one of these two soldiers has a skill set that is easily measurable with a pen and paper. So no, IQ tests are not a good measure of intelligence. If anything, it is a distant proxy to the real thing that measures an individual along a very narrow set of skills within a certain cultural environment that also assumes that all individuals would have benefited from the same educational and social advantages. Yes, because yet another problem with IQ tests is that they measure the current state of easy-to-quantify cognitive skills, and they do not measure the potential of an individual, which is even more important to measure. So then, if we can't measure intelligence for an individual, can we measure it for a group? Proponents of the racial hierarchization of humans, who put Afro-descendants or melanated people at the bottom of that fictitious scale, often tout the argument that black people are not smart because they have no civilization to speak of. This is interesting because, as we have seen, the TKTL1 gene did not emerge in Europe where Neanderthal went extinct. It did not emerge in Asia, where various other hominids also went extinct with the advent of Homo sapiens sapiens out of Africa. No, the TKTL1 gene mutation emerged in Africa, in southern Africa, 400,000 years ago. But even more interesting is that the two most influential civilizations in human history were created and peopled black Africans until very late in the historical record. And we are talking about the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex that we call ancient Egypt today, and the Sumerian civilization. We have covered extensively the scientific evidence that shows that both these civilizations were beholden to black people. See our episodes 14, 19, and 21 on our channel. These civilizations are consequential because they ushered for humanity writing, mathematics including algebra, astronomy, chemistry, medicine, architecture, constitutions, organized religion, advanced agriculture, sailboats and open sea navigation, the wheel, waterworks, and 100 more inventions from toothpaste to surgery. And all this, the black Africans had for millennia, while Europeans and Asians did not have any meaningful advancement. At least until the Africans spread out and introduced these civilizing elements to the rest of the globe. How then can one defend the assertion that black people are alien to civilization if they are the very people who started it, while all other groups were still hunter-gatherers? Well, here too, the dishonesty of the 18th and 19th century anthropologists have left its mark. While they were very aware of the truth, historians like Oppert worked to hide and misattribute any evidence that showed that Sumer was black. And similarly, aside from a few courageous exceptions, 19th century Egyptologists did the same for ancient Egypt. And all this in an effort to hang on to a lie that was made for economic reasons. Being that the black man wasn't as human as other humans, and thus it was okay to mistreat him and use him as the base for the economic system that culminated in the industrial era. So all achievements of the black man were denied and reassigned, because you could not maintain an argument of inferiority while having the most influential civilizations in history being black. There are also countless African civilizations that have not been popularized nor romanticized because of the same reasons, including civilizations in southern Africa that could date as far back as 200,000 years. But this cover-up of the truth is changing fast, in the same way that perception of what makes a truly evolved human has been exposed in great fashion in the information age. And here too, when looking at human evolutionary vectors, an interesting pattern emerges. As humans branched away from primates, key traits have distinguished us. We have covered intelligence already. However, there are many other traits that can be grouped under the banner of human evolutionary vectors. And these traits continue to diverge away from those of primates. Loss of body hair. One of the easiest characteristics that separate humans from primate is reduced presence of body hair. Long posterior limbs or long legs. This makes sense as humans become more successful as hunter-gatherers with longer posterior limbs. This is paired with another human evolutionary vector, the enlargement of the gluteus maximus, the posterior, again correlated with greater success as hunter-gatherer. For female humans, the posterior also served as a store of energy, signifying greater survivability for her offspring. Larger lips. Compared to our primates' cousins, humans have evolved larger lips. They also evolved into secondary mating attributes. Significant reduction in ear size. Another evolutionary vector for humans is the average human height. It has continued to increase, with many of the other hominids barely reaching 4'5" in average height, with anatomically modern humans being the tallest on average. There is also one defining evolutionary vector that is seldom talked about, and it is the size of the male reproductive organ. As humans evolved from primates, their male reproductive organs have increased significantly, becoming a defining feature for sapiens sapiens. This trait has also become a highly selective trait amongst human females. There is a strong correlation between the size of the male reproductive organ and several attributes that point to increased male success, such as increased testosterone, overall health and healthy blood flow, which points to better cardiovascular health, which is essential for hunting. It also correlates tightly with height. All of them, essential evolutionary vectors, and thus key selection traits amongst human females. A brief pause here to point out that it is the female in the human species that has the greater role deciding how the species will evolve through mate selection. But this is a whole other chapter that I will make a separate video on. In fact, it is not hard to find those human evolutionary vectors, because they happen to coincide with the traits that female humans look for and prioritize in a mate. Smart, tall, hairless, healthy-looking, athletic, with a large reproductive organ, and successful. There is one human ethnic group in which these traits occur at a higher incidence than any other, and it is that very group that early European and Arab anthropologists tried to label as evolutionarily backwards. The irony of this cannot be understated, and in this information age it isn't just the black male, but also the black female phenotype that is being imitated now at all costs. Even the black curly hair that has been so demonized is yet another evolutionary vector. Because the purpose of hair, before it doubles as a fashion appendage, its purpose is to protect the most precious organ in the body, the brain, and kinky hair offers by far the most protection. Note here too that there are absolutely no primates with kinky hair. None. They all have straight hair with thicker roots. People of African descent have the thinnest hair roots of all humans and all primates. So, does that mean that black people are superior human beings? Followers of this channel will know by now that I do not subscribe to any notions of racial superiority for any group. All these physical variations that we see in human groups today are ridiculously minute when we start comparing the modern human to any hominid family. It is laughable today to see those who have agendas manipulate the masses by using nonsensical arguments that are meant to divide us into groups that are then easier to manipulate. If anything, studies have shown that differences in human cognitive outcomes are more influenced by these following surprising factors. To really understand how massive the impact of psychology is on human intelligence, we have to go back to the 70s. In 1968, Jane Elliott ran an experiment where she separated an all-white classroom in two groups using arbitrary criteria. She told them that blue-eyed people were better and smarter than brown-eyed people. What followed was nothing short of surprising. The group on top started to feel superior and started to viciously bully the brown-eye white kids. Furthermore, the academic performance of the kids on top shot up. At the same time, the academic performances of the disfavored kids went way down. And all of this within a 24-hour time frame. If your kids are not learning their true worth through history, they will be held back through decades of forced moral and societal mental imprint. Let your kids know about their ancestors' achievements from the invention of medicine, algebra, philosophy, virtue through ma'at, dental care, organized religion, paper, writing, calendar, binary code, Olympic Games, the wheel, sundial, pets, temple building, masonry, decimal system, astrology, astronomy, glass, police, makeup, women rights, and so much more. This means that if you are made to believe, by a figure of authority, that you are not smart, then overnight, your brain will have the performance of someone who isn't smart, while at the same time providing a psychological boost to those who have been placed above you. So when 19th century scientists wrongly asserted that the white man was mentally superior and more evolved, they may not have known it, but they essentially preconditioned all of us. Yet another way to debunk the myth of the unintelligent black man is to look at Nigerian Americans and Ghanaian Americans who consistently score amongst the top of all immigrant groups in both academic and economic rankings, and this is mainly due to their culture of high achievement and separation from lifelong organized discrimination. 29% of Nigerian Americans over the age of 25 have a master's degree or higher, and their participation in the high-tech sector, healthcare, and the education sector is rapidly growing. So the psychology of intelligence, especially social pressure or expectation, are a far more important factor in an individual's ability to exercise their intellectual potential than skin color or size of the brain is. In fact, today, women outperform men in education while sporting a much smaller brain on average than men. And yet for decades, until the academic statistics between men and women were reversed, the myth of the men's mental superiority was touted and brain size was used as a further justification. The consequences of the popularization of these racially charged falsehoods have caused pain, suffering, and economic retardement. Oh, by the way, when we said that 29% of Nigerian Americans over 25 have a master's degree, there is one thing we didn't mention. Guess what the equivalent percentage is for white Americans? 14%. The truth is that once we became human, 400,000 years ago, all of our evolutionary pressure has been towards becoming better hunter-gatherers, smarter and more successful at bringing back gain to feed the family and the clan, and more successful females that can nurture and protect our offsprings while men hunt. During this evolution, there have been several choke points that essentially served as funnels for human gene diversity. This is why all humans on the planet are so similar. The key traits that make us human, these traits that all emerged in Africa, we all have them. And if there was one, even one, that proponents of racial hierarchy could use with certainty to exclude the black African from the human gene pool, they would have. But every time one is found, it has been shown to emerge in Africa first. The irony of ironies is that, in their effort to try and deny the black man's humanity, those historians and anthropologists have repeatedly and unwillingly forwarded the best arguments for the exact opposite, not only through genetics, but also through true history. From the black Natufians who invented agriculture, to the black Sumerians and ancient Egyptians who gave us the pillars of our civilization, to the return of the African in Europe as Moors that culminated in the Renaissance. And by exposing the truth that will not get popularized by these anthropologists and historians who have sworn a duty to the truth we are showing, if any group on earth held the right to be racist, any group at all, it would be that very group who happens to be the most welcoming of all. That very group who shared its knowledge of civilization to benefit all. That very group which shared its genes to make all others a little more human. Black people. To anybody who has ever donated or shared our videos or clicked the like buttons, you guys are the true heroes of enlightenment. Find the links below to support us via YouTube membership or Patreon. May Mahat find you all. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.